For 40 years, police had his DNA at every single crime scene. They knew his shoe size, his voice, his physical build, and they still couldn't find him. Until a retired investigator uploaded his DNA to a genealogy website and identified him in 72 hours.
The sheer scale of the terror inflicted on California is almost incomprehensible. This was an unprecedented cold case, a phantom who haunted the state for decades, leaving behind shattered lives and completely baffled investigators.
Part 1. The Escalation Timeline. What makes this case so complex is that he actually operated under 3 completely distinct aliases before law enforcement even realized they were hunting the exact same man. If we look back to the mid-1970s, he was known as the Visalia Ransacker, responsible for over 120 burglaries. Then, by June 1976, he moved to the Sacramento area and severely escalated his violence. There, he became the East Area Rapist, committing over 50 sexual assaults. Finally, between 1979 and 1986, he shifted his focus down to Southern California as the original Night Stalker, murdering 13 people. His geography constantly changed, but his terrifying methods only grew more calculated over time.
You have to understand, his modus operandi was pure psychological torture. He would break into homes, bind his victims, and then construct these crude, makeshift alarm systems. He'd actually balance teacups or plates on the backs of his bound victims, threatening to kill everyone in the house if he heard the dishes rattle. And he didn't steal for wealth. He took these bizarre, low-value keepsakes. Things like a single earring, a handful of blue-chip stamps, or personal photographs. The terror didn't even end when he left the house. He would call his victims months, sometimes years later, just whispering taunts through the phone to remind them that he was still out there.
Part 2. The Cop Who Hunted Himself. So while entire communities armed themselves, while locksmiths worked overtime and police patrols were doubled, the killer always seemed one step ahead. And there was a chilling reason for that. Joseph James DeAngelo was hiding in plain sight. He actually worked as a police officer in the burglary units of the very towns he was terrorizing. He possessed insider knowledge of police procedures, stakeout protocols, and radio frequencies. He knew exactly how the police would respond because, well, he was one of them. He used this training to map out escape routes, completely avoid leaving fingerprints, and just vanish into the night moments before his own colleagues arrived on the scene. But here is the bizarre twist. It wasn't some sprawling statewide murder investigation that ended his law enforcement career. Despite his massive and violent crime spree, DeAngelo was actually fired from the Auburn Police Department in 1979 after being caught shoplifting a hammer and a can of dog repellent. He lost his badge over a misdemeanor. But tragically, his most violent era was just beginning.
Part 3. The Forensic Dead End.
By the late 1990s and early 2000s, DNA technology had finally advanced enough to prove that these 3 separate criminal aliases were, in fact, the same person. Investigators had pristine DNA from multiple crime scenes, but when they ran it through CODIS, the National DNA Database, it returned 0 matches. Why? Because the system required a prior felony arrest for a person's DNA to be entered. DeAngelo's 1979 shoplifting charge, the one that got him fired, that was only a misdemeanor. Because he was never caught for a felony, his genetic profile simply did not exist in the system. The entire investigation hit a massive, seemingly impenetrable wall.
Here's the question that stumped an entire generation of detectives. How do you find a man whose DNA you already have? The answer changed policing forever.
Part 4. The Genealogy Breakthrough. After decades of these agonizing dead ends, the breakthrough didn't come from a police database at all. It came from family history. In 2018, investigator Paul Holes and genetic genealogist Barbara Ray Venter took the killer's DNA profile and uploaded it to GDmatch, which is a public genealogy site. Now, they weren't expecting to find the killer himself. They were looking for his distant relatives. And they found a match. Relatives who shared great-great-great-grandparents from all the way back in the 1800s. From there, they began the incredibly painstaking process of working forward through time. Investigators built massive family trees containing approximately 25,000 people. Branch by branch, they systematically eliminated individuals. They filtered based on age, gender, and geographic location during the times of the crimes. They knew they were looking for a white male, roughly 25 to 35 years old in the mid-1970s, living in various specific areas of California. Through sheer process of elimination, thousands of branches fell away until only one viable name remained on the tree, Joseph James DeAngelo. But to actually prove it in court, law enforcement needed a fresh DNA sample.
So they tracked the 72-year-old D'Angelo and covertly collected his DNA on 2 separate occasions. First, they managed to swab the door handle of his car while he was parked outside a Hobby Lobby. Then, a short time later, investigators retrieved a used tissue right out of his curbside garbage can. The lab took those samples and tested them against the 40-year-old crime scene evidence. It was a 100% genetic match.
Part 5. The arrest. The 40-year manhunt was finally over. On April 24, 2018, law enforcement descended on a quiet, unremarkable suburban street in Citrus Heights, California. They completely surrounded D'Angelo in his driveway. The phantom who had terrorized an entire state, the man who had committed 13 murders and over 50 assaults, was now just a frail 72-year-old man standing by his car. When he was confronted by the police and placed under arrest for decades of unprecedented terror, D'Angelo's reaction was deeply absurd. He simply looked at the arresting officers and told them, "I have a roast in the oven." He was ultimately sentenced to multiple consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole, ensuring that he will die in prison.
Part 6. The bigger question. The capture of the Golden State Killer closed one of the darkest chapters in history, but it simultaneously opened a completely new ethical frontier. The very method used to catch D'Angelo created an intense, ongoing dilemma. On one hand, forensic genealogy is an undeniably powerful tool. It has since been used to solve hundreds of impossible cold cases, bringing dangerous serial killers to justice and finally giving closure to grieving families. But on the other hand, it raises severe privacy concerns. Law enforcement was able to scan the public genetic data of thousands of innocent people without a single warrant, effectively turning private citizens' DNA into a massive tool for police surveillance.
The technology is here, and as we've seen, it works, but it forces society to make an incredibly difficult choice. Where do you draw the line between justice and privacy?